Today's video I'm going to be talking about the Laos case study. This is part one, where we look at patterns of immigration, emigration and migration policies. This is particularly interesting because it's a country with limited influence on how it responds to changes in the migration system. So this is Laos. It is a landlocked LIDC in Southeast Asia. It's a very poor country in terms of GDP per capita, around about $2,500 US, and it is dominated by the primary sector with 73% people working in agriculture. So it's a poor country, and as I mentioned, it is a country that does not drive migration change in other countries like the USA would, where it drives changes in Mexico. It responds or is influenced by changes from outside, and therefore we say it has limited influence over global migration patterns. It simply responds to them. So it's a country of net migration loss. Again, this is it responding to change from outside. And more people leave Laos than actually enter it. And most of those people are heading to Thailand, which is a very nearby emerging economy. Again, so any economic growth in Thailand leads to people leaving, and therefore Laos is responding to the change rather than driving it. We mentioned just then that lots of people will be living in Thailand. There is 1.3 million people from Laos, Laotians living abroad. Most of those are in Thailand, but also there will be a significant group in the US. Very few people come to Laos, with the major group being 10,000 from Vietnam, which is in the South Asian region, and therefore is close enough. But we can see here that most people are leaving and going abroad, and not many people are actually coming to Laos for any opportunities. So we can look at the reasons why lots of people are leaving and we get this net migration loss. And one of the major reasons is that Laotians are mainly subsistence farmers. We said 73% work in agriculture. So there are very few opportunities in rural areas, and the opportunities they do have in farming provide little income. So emigration not only offers them a greater range of opportunities economically, but also the chance to go abroad and send money back in the form of remittances. A really key fact to know here, in Laos, the daily minimum wage would be 80 baht. And if I go to Thailand, it's quite significantly higher, 300 baht. So this is a real incentive for Laotians to leave and make money because rural opportunities are very limited. Another problem in rural communities is that there is regular drought. That leads to food insecurity. And so many of the rural poor actually leave in search of opportunities. They're pushed away. And we can also say that there is actually a lack of sufficient land for farmers to be actually able to use, and another factor pushing people away from these rural areas. Not only are there push factors, but there are also kind of pull factors. So lots of Laotians will have seen people emigrate and have financial success, and then they return. And so people are encouraged to do it, having seen these success stories. Equally, remittances can become the main source of income for many of these families. And so it's an essential rite of passage for many Laotians to go and actually make money. One of the other issues is that there is a lot of unskilled workers in Laos, but largely because it's an LIDC, and therefore education isn't available for everyone, and so it's low education levels. Luckily, Thailand, the emerging economy, has a great demand for unskilled workers, and so Laotians end up crossing the border and filling in labour gaps in construction, fisheries, agriculture, and the secondary industry and factories. Another factor that means there are very few intervening obstacles, so a very positive factor, is we can find migrant brokers. These are people that try to set up jobs in Thailand for Laotians, and they help them get to the border and across it. The Thai and Lao languages are very, very similar, so anybody that's going to Thailand can integrate very quickly, they can get jobs very easily, and there's infrastructure improvements. So we have these things called friendship bridges, which we'll talk about later in the video, and there is improved access to get across the major river that separates the country, Laos and Thailand, called the Mekong River. So we've talked about emigration. I'm now going to talk about migration policies, and one of the policies is having to combat a major problem, which is human trafficking. Laos is a source country, so lots of people who originate in Laos get trafficked to places like Thailand, and the government, being a government that's an LIDC, has not had the resources or political stability to be able to deal with this problem, and so has really struggled to implement decent policies. Anyone interested in an extension should look at the underage Liberian African footballers who've been trafficked to Laos to play football. But I'm going to now look at the policies that have been in place. We can see here that Laos is a country that it has severe trafficking issues. This is a global report, and it's at the moment on the list that said does not fully comply. It has eventually moved up to tier 2 in recent years, but we can still that there is efforts to make improvements, but they're still not fully complying with kind of human trafficking laws that are globally recognised. What they've tried to do is they've set up a national plan of action for human trafficking. This is the Laos government with the International Organisation of Migration, and that's part of the UN. And they've come up with a 3-step plan: prevention, protection, and prosecution. And the prevention is to stop trafficking happening in the first place. So if we can alleviate poverty back in Laos so people don't need to migrate, that will stop trafficking happening. If we can raise awareness campaigns of what trafficking looks like and how to protect people, that means that they won't actually get themselves in trouble or fall for certain scams potentially. Protection is where we actually protect people that have been trafficked. So an example of this would be shelters for women who have been trafficked and need counselling. And the obvious one is prosecution. This is where some sort of legal action is taken. Better training of border officials to spot trafficking, but also investigations into trafficking networks to make sure that criminals are brought to justice. The last thing to mention on migration policies is that Laos is part of the ASEAN free trade bloc. This is very similar to the EU for Europeans, and this has certain migration policies. It allows skilled labour to have greater freedom of movement under certain conditions. If you've been in a country for working in a profession for 5 years, after that you can move. So because of that, we see greater movement of skilled professionals, nurses, dentists, architects, moving away from places like Laos for economic opportunities in other areas of the ASEAN network. This is not a major area of migration, but it is important to know that this is a policy and therefore is significant in terms of knowing about how the Laos government deals with this and the patterns it might create.